A woman with nothing. A warrior with everything to lose, one moon to decide if survival is worth the price of choice. I never thought freedom would smell like smoke and sage. I never imagined it would wear war paint and speak a language I didn't understand. But standing in that Apache camp with hunger gnawing at my bones and death breathing down my neck, I learned something the frontier never taught me. Sometimes the most dangerous choice is the one that sets you free. My name is Eliza Ward, and this is the story of how I traded everything I knew for everything I never dared to want. If you're watching this, drop a comment below with your city. I want to see how far this story travels. Hit that like button and let's begin. The Chiricahua Mountains didn't care that Eliza Ward was dying. The wilderness stretched endlessly in every direction, indifferent to her cracked lips, her bleeding feet, her hollow stomach that had forgotten the meaning of fullness 3 days ago. Maybe 4. Time had become as meaningless as hope. She stumbled over a root she should have seen, caught herself against a pine trunk rough enough to scrape her palm raw. The pain barely registered. Everything hurt now. Her whole body had become one continuous ache, punctuated only by the sharper stabs of blisters, cuts, and muscles stretched beyond their limits. Just a little farther, she told herself. The same lies she'd been repeating since she'd crawled out of the ravine where the wagon had shattered, since she'd left Thomas's body covered with stones because the ground was too hard to dig, and she had no strength left for the dead. The sun was beginning its descent, painting the sky in shades of amber and blood. Beautiful, if she'd had the luxury of noticing beauty. Instead, she noticed only that darkness was coming, and with it the cold that would seep into her bones, and the sounds that would emerge from the forest, sounds that made her grip the knife she'd salvaged from the wreckage until her knuckles went white. A knife. Against mountain lions, bears, wolves. Against whatever else prowled these mountains that the wagon master had warned them about in whispers, casting nervous glances toward the tree line. Savages, he'd called them. Worse than animals. Pray you never meet them. Eliza had prayed, for all the good it had done. She pressed forward, each step a negotiation with her failing body. The terrain sloped downward here, and she let gravity pull her along, half walking, half falling through underbrush that snagged her already ruined dress. The fabric had been green once, she thought, or maybe blue. Now it was the color of mud and blood and defeat. The creek appeared without warning, a silver ribbon cutting through the rocks, singing its eternal song to no one. Eliza's throat constricted at the sight of it. Water. She'd been rationing the last drops from her canteen since yesterday, and even those were gone now, the container dry as bone. She didn't remember deciding to run. Suddenly she was just moving, faster than she'd moved in days, her body finding strength it shouldn't have had. She collapsed at the creek's edge, plunged her hands into the current without thinking about how cold it was, brought palmfuls to her mouth and drank like an animal. It was the most beautiful thing she'd ever tasted. She drank until her stomach cramped, until the shock of cold water on an empty belly made her gasp and pull back. Then she drank more, slower this time, cupping the water carefully, letting it slide down her throat like a blessing. When she finally stopped, she sat back on her heels and let herself cry. The tears came hot and hard, surprising her with their intensity. She'd thought herself too empty for tears, too wrung out by days of walking and nights of terror and the endless gnawing fear that she would die out here, alone, her bones picked clean by scavengers and scattered across these godforsaken mountains. Thomas was dead. Their wagon was destroyed. The rest of the wagon train was gone, pulled ahead by the promise of California gold and the wagon master's insistence that they couldn't wait for stragglers. She was alone in a wilderness that had already killed stronger people than her, with nothing but a knife, the clothes on her back, and a creek's worth of water that would do her no good when night fell and the temperature dropped below freezing. She should keep moving, find shelter, try to make a fire, though she had nothing to start one with and no strength left to try. Instead, she stayed by the creek, watching the water flow past, wondering if this was where her story would end. If some future traveler would find her bones here and wonder who she'd been, what dreams had carried her west only to die inside of water she couldn't drink fast enough to save herself. "I'm sorry, Thomas," she whispered to the dying light. Sorry for the argument that had made him drive recklessly. Sorry that his dreams of California had ended in a ravine. Sorry that she'd survived when he hadn't, though she wasn't sure how much longer that would remain true. The arrow appeared in the tree trunk 3 inches from her head. Eliza's scream caught in her throat, emerged as a choked gasp instead. She scrambled backward, her hand finding the knife at her belt as her eyes tracked the arrow's trajectory to the source. They were everywhere. Men emerged from the forest like shadows given form, materializing from spaces that had been empty a heartbeat before. 6 of them. 7. More. Eliza's mind couldn't count them, couldn't process anything beyond the primal terror that flooded her system and turned her limbs to water. Savages. The word rose unbidden, carried on the wagon master's voice, wrapped in every story she'd ever heard about what happened to white women taken by Indians. Stories told in whispers, in warnings, in nightmares. She raised the knife with a shaking hand. The man in front, taller than the others, his face painted with red and black stripes that made him look like something from a fever dream, said something in a language that sounded like water over stones. His tone was neither angry nor kind, merely curious. "Stay back," Eliza managed, her voice cracking. The knife wavered in her grip. "I'll fight you." It was the most absurd thing she'd ever said. She could barely stand. Her knife was a pitiful thing against their bows, their rifles, their sheer numbers. But it was all she had, defiance in the face of the inevitable. The tall man spoke again, his words incomprehensible. Then he gestured, a simple motion that somehow conveyed both command and invitation. The men behind him moved forward. Eliza slashed wildly with the knife. "I said, stay back!" They didn't stay back. They surrounded her in seconds, moving with a coordination that spoke of long practice. One of them caught her wrist, not roughly, but firmly enough that the knife fell from her nerveless fingers and clattered against the stones. She fought anyway, kicked, thrashed, screamed herself hoarse. It made no difference. They lifted her easily, carried her between them like she weighed nothing at all. Maybe she didn't anymore. Maybe days without food had reduced her to something light enough to blow away on the wind. The world tilted and spun. Eliza's vision grayed at the edges, shock and exhaustion finally claiming what little strength she'd had left. The last thing she registered before darkness took her was the steady rhythm of movement, the sensation of being carried deeper into the mountains, farther from anything she'd ever known, farther from any chance of rescue. When consciousness returned, it came in fragments. Firelight, warm against her face. The smell of smoke and cooking meat that made her empty stomach clench painfully. Voices speaking in that water-over-stones language, low and measured, the scratch of a wool blanket against her skin. Eliza's eyes flew open. She was inside some kind of shelter, hide stretched over wooden frames, the interior lit by a central fire that cast dancing shadows on the walls. The space was larger than she'd expected, organized with a precision that surprised her. Weapons hung along one wall. Bundles of dried herbs and food stores lined another. Everything in its place, purposeful and ordered. She sat up too quickly. The world spun, and a wave of nausea rolled through her. She pressed a hand to her mouth, breathing hard through her nose until the feeling passed. The flap covering the shelter's entrance moved aside. Eliza's heart hammered against her ribs as the tall man from the creek ducked inside. Up close, without panic clouding her vision, she could see him more clearly. The war paint. The long dark hair bound with leather and feathers. Eyes that studied her with an intensity that made her want to look away but couldn't. He was younger than she'd first thought. Maybe 30, maybe less. The paint made it hard to tell. He said something, a question, judging by the inflection. "I don't understand you," Eliza said. Her voice came out hoarse, barely above a whisper. The man tilted his head slightly, considering her. Then he moved to the fire, ladled something from a pot into a wooden bowl, and held it out to her. Eliza stared at the bowl, at him, at the bowl again. The smell of whatever was inside, some kind of stew, rich and substantial, made her mouth water so intensely it hurt. Is it poisoned? The question was stupid. If they wanted her dead, they wouldn't have bothered bringing her here, feeding her. But fear made people ask stupid questions. He said something else, his tone patient, and set the bowl on the ground between them when she didn't take it. They regarded each other across the firelight. Eliza knew she should be terrified. She was terrified. But beneath the terror was something else, a strange, hollow curiosity. He hadn't hurt her, hadn't touched her except to carry her here, had given her a blanket, offered her food, None of it matched the stories she'd been told. Her stomach growled, loud enough to echo in the shelter. The man's mouth quirked, almost a smile, but not quite. He pushed the bowl closer to her. Eliza reached for it slowly, watching for any sign of danger. Her fingers closed around the warm wood. She brought it to her lips and sipped cautiously. The stew was the best thing she'd ever tasted. She didn't mean to, but she drank it down in desperate gulps, too hungry to care about manners or caution or the fact that she was eating food given to her by a man whose people were supposed to be her enemies. The warmth spread through her chest, her limbs, pushing back the cold that had lived in her bones for days. When the bowl was empty, she set it down carefully and met his eyes again. "Thank you," she said, because even terror and confusion couldn't erase the lessons her mother had beaten into her about gratitude. The man nodded once, as if he understood. Maybe he did. Maybe thank you sounded the same in any language. He stood, moved to the entrance, paused, said something over his shoulder, another question, softer this time. Eliza shook her head helplessly. "I don't know what you're saying." He studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he left, the hide flap falling closed behind him. Eliza sat alone by the fire, wrapped in a blanket that didn't belong to her, in a shelter she didn't understand, surrounded by people who should have killed her but instead had saved her life. She should try to escape, should wait until they were sleeping and slip away into the night, try to find her way back to… what? There was no wagon train to return to, no Thomas waiting at the end of the trail, no California dreams left to chase. There was only the wilderness and the certainty of death. Here at least there was food, warmth, shelter, and something else, something she couldn't name yet, but felt like the first small crack in the wall of terror that had defined her existence for so long. Morning came too soon and not soon enough. Eliza woke to voices outside the shelter, men's voices, many of them, engaged in some kind of discussion or argument. She couldn't tell which. The language remained impenetrable, though she found herself listening for patterns, for anything that might give her a clue about what was happening, what was going to happen to her. The flap opened. 3 women entered, their faces carefully neutral. They were younger than Eliza, girls, really, though something in their eyes suggested they'd lived harder lives than their years implied. They carried bundles in their arms and regarded her with open curiosity. One of them spoke, her tone gentle. When Eliza didn't respond, the girl tried again, slower, as if volume and speed were the only barriers to understanding. "I don't speak your language," Eliza said, spreading her hands helplessly. "I'm sorry. I don't know what you want." The girls exchanged glances. The tallest one, she couldn't be more than 16, stepped forward and gestured at Eliza's dress, then at the bundles they carried. The meaning was clear enough. They wanted to change her clothes. Eliza's first instinct was to refuse. The dress was ruined, yes, but it was hers. One of the last things she owned that connected her to the life she'd known. But the practical part of her brain, the part that had kept her alive these past terrible days, recognized that the dress was more liability than asset now. The fabric was torn, filthy, offering neither warmth nor modesty. "All right," she said quietly. "All right." The girls moved with practiced efficiency, helping her out of the destroyed dress and into clothing that felt strange against her skin. Soft leather, worked until it was supple as cloth, decorated with intricate beadwork. The dress fit well enough, clearly made for someone with similar proportions. Eliza tried not to think about who might have worn it before. Where that woman might be now. They braided her hair, worked some kind of oil through it that smelled of sage. One of them offered her moccasins to replace her ruined boots. Another brought water in a clay vessel and a cloth, gesturing at Eliza's face. Eliza washed, grateful to scrub away days of dirt and dried sweat. When she was finished, the girls nodded approvingly, speaking to each other in rapid bursts that might have been praise or might have been criticism. She had no way of knowing. The tall girl gestured for Eliza to follow. She did, because what else was there to do? Outside, the camp spread before her in the morning light. More shelters like the one she'd slept in, arranged in a loose circle. Women working hides, tending fires, watching children who played some intricate game with stones. Men checking weapons, speaking in low voices. Dogs wandering between the shelters, looking for scraps. It looked ordinary, like any settlement she might have seen back east, If you substituted hide shelters for wooden cabins and ignored the vast cultural chasm between her world and this one. Everyone stared as she passed. Some hostile, some curious, most carefully blank, their expressions giving nothing away. The tall girl led her to the far side of the camp, where several men stood gathered in what appeared to be a council. Eliza recognized the tall painted warrior from yesterday. The paint was gone now, revealing a face that was handsome in a severe way, all sharp angles and serious eyes. He saw her and said something to the other men. They turned as one to study her, their faces grave. Eliza's mouth went dry. This was it then. Whatever they'd been discussing, it involved her. She was about to learn her fate. One of the older men, his face weathered by sun and time, his hair shot through with silver, spoke at length. His tone was formal, each word weighted with significance. The tall warrior listened without interrupting, his expression revealing nothing. When the older man finished, the tall warrior responded. Brief, decisive. The kind of statement that didn't invite argument. The older man's eyebrows rose. He asked something, a question that sounded skeptical. The tall warrior's response was longer this time, but no less certain. He gestured once toward Eliza, then placed his hand over his heart. The gesture seemed to carry meaning beyond the physical motion. The old man studied them both for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly and spoke again, his words measured but carrying the weight of acceptance. Whatever had just been decided, it was settled. The tall warrior turned to Eliza. He said something in that water-over-stones language, his eyes holding hers. Then he switched to halting English, the words clearly unfamiliar in his mouth but deliberate. You, stay. One moon. He held up a finger. One moon, you choose. Free. He gestured broadly, indicating the wilderness beyond the camp. Or stay. You choose. Eliza's breath caught. Of all the things she'd expected him to say, this wasn't among them. I don't understand, she whispered. Choose what? He seemed to struggle with the English, his brow furrowing in concentration. Finally, he placed his hand on his chest. Dakota. Then he gestured to her, a question in his eyes. She understood. He was telling her his name. Eliza, she managed. My name is Eliza. Dakota nodded. He repeated her name carefully, his accent turning it into something slightly different but still recognizable. Eliza, one moon. He held up his finger again. Then choose. Choose what? She asked again, though part of her was beginning to understand and didn't want to believe it. Dakota gestured between them. Then he pointed to one of the shelters. His shelter, she realized. Where she'd slept last night. He said something in his language that sounded formal, ceremonial almost. Then in English, wife. One moon, then free. You choose stay, or you choose go. Your choice. The world tilted sideways. He was offering her, what? Marriage? But temporary? With an option to leave? And he was saying it like she had actual power in the decision, like her choice mattered, like she wasn't a prisoner or a slave or any of the things she'd been taught Indian captives became. I can't. The words tangled in her throat. This had to be a trick, a trap. Men didn't offer women choices. Men took what they wanted and called it marriage, and then took more until there was nothing left to take. Except Dakota was looking at her like he expected an answer, like he genuinely meant what he'd said, like her choice actually mattered. One moon, he repeated. Then you choose. I not. He struggled with the word, finally settled on, I not take. You choose. The older man said something, his tone carrying approval. The other men nodded, though their expressions remained skeptical. They were watching her, waiting to see what she would do. Eliza's mind raced. 1 month, 4 weeks, 28 days of safety, food, shelter, and then freedom to leave if she wanted or stay if she didn't. It was the strangest proposal she'd ever heard. It was also the first one that had ever treated her like she had agency in the matter. Why? The question burst out before she could stop it. Why are you doing this? Dakota tilted his head, considering. His English was clearly limited, but he seemed to understand. You alone, he said finally. You die alone. Now not alone. Now choose. It was the simplest, most honest thing anyone had ever said to her. Thomas had married her because his family pressured him to settle down, because a wife was an asset on the trail west, someone to cook and clean and warm his bed. He'd never asked what she wanted, never suggested she had a choice. This man, this stranger whose name she'd learned 5 minutes ago, whose language she didn't speak, whose world was utterly foreign to everything she knew, was offering her something her own husband never had. A choice. The smart thing would be to refuse, to demand they take her to the nearest fort, the nearest white settlement, anywhere that wasn't here, to escape this impossible situation before it became more complicated. But the smart thing would also mean walking back into the wilderness alone. Starving. Dying by degrees while the mountains watched with indifference. And beyond that, if she somehow survived to reach civilization, it would mean walking back into a world where she had no choices at all, where her dead husband's debts would become hers, where her only options were remarriage to whoever would take a penniless widow, or a life of servitude, cleaning other women's houses and raising other women's children until she was too old to work and too poor to eat. Here, at least, she could choose, even if the choice was terrifying. Eliza looked at Dakota, at the camp around them, at the women working, the children playing, the dogs lazily warming themselves in the morning sun. It wasn't civilization. It wasn't safety in any way she understood. But it was life. And it came with a promise she'd never been given before. She took a breath, let it out slowly. "One moon," she said. Her voice shook, but the words were clear. "And then I choose." Dakota's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Relief, maybe, or respect. "One moon," he agreed. "Then you choose." He extended his hand. After a moment's hesitation, Eliza placed hers in it. His grip was warm, calloused, solid. The grip of someone who worked with his hands, who knew the value of strength tempered by control. The old man spoke again, his words carrying the cadence of ritual or blessing. The other men echoed something that might have been agreement. The women working nearby had stopped to watch, their faces showing various degrees of surprise, curiosity, and in some cases, hostility. Eliza understood that last emotion, at least. She was an outsider, a white woman in an Apache camp. Whatever Dakota had just promised her, it wouldn't make her welcome. It wouldn't erase the gulf between her world and theirs. But it gave her 28 days to figure out if the gulf could be crossed, or if she even wanted to cross it. Dakota released her hand and gestured toward his shelter. "Come," he said in English. Then something in his language that might have been an invitation or might have been a command. She couldn't tell the difference yet. Eliza followed him across the camp, acutely aware of every eye tracking her movement. The shelter that had been temporary refuge last night now represented something entirely different. A home, of sorts. A life she'd never imagined. A choice she'd never thought she'd have to make. Inside, Dakota moved with quiet efficiency, arranging space in a way that seemed deliberate. He gestured to one side of the shelter, where furs were laid out for sleeping, then to the other side, where his weapons hung and his possessions were stored. A clear division, a boundary. He caught her eye and pointed to the divided space. "You choose," he said again, the words taking on new weight. Not just about staying or leaving, about everything, about how much distance she wanted to keep, how much of herself she was willing to risk. "I understand," Eliza said, though she wasn't sure she did. Wasn't sure she understood anything anymore. Dakota nodded. He said something else in his language, longer this time, his tone serious but not unkind. She wished desperately that she could understand, that the meaning would somehow become clear through sheer force of will. He must have seen the frustration on her face, because he paused, considered. Then he did something unexpected. He sat down by the fire and patted the ground across from him. An invitation. Eliza sat, drawing the borrowed dress around her knees. Dakota pointed to himself. Dakota. Then to her. Eliza. Then to the fire between them. He said a word in his language. She understood. He was going to teach her. For the next hour, they sat by that fire while Dakota patiently named everything in the shelter. Fire, water, bowl, blanket, knife, each word repeated until Eliza could approximate the sounds, until the strange language began to form patterns in her mind. He was patient when she stumbled over pronunciations, encouraging when she got something right, never frustrated by her slowness to grasp concepts that must have seemed simple to him. It was the strangest language lesson she'd ever had. It was also the kindest. When the sun had climbed higher and voices outside indicated the camp was in full motion, Dakota stood. He gestured for Eliza to stay, then left the shelter. She sat alone, repeating the words he'd taught her under her breath, testing them on her tongue, trying to make sense of this new reality where she sat in an Apache shelter, wearing Apache clothes, learning an Apache language from a man who'd promised her something no one else ever had, the freedom to choose. The shelter flap opened again. One of the girls from this morning entered, carrying a basket. She smiled shyly at Eliza and set the basket down, filled with some kind of roots or tubers. Eliza wasn't sure which. The girl pointed to the basket, then to herself, then to Eliza. She mimed the motion of digging, then preparing food, an invitation to work, to be useful, to participate in the life of the camp rather than existing as a passive observer. Eliza nodded. The girl's smile widened. She gestured for Eliza to follow. Outside, several women had gathered near one of the shelters, working together to process the roots. They looked up as Eliza approached, their expressions ranging from curious to wary. The girl who'd brought her spoke quickly, gesturing between Eliza and the work. One of the older women, her face lined with age and wisdom, studied Eliza for a long moment. Then she nodded and gestured to an empty space in their circle. Eliza sat. The woman handed her a sharp stone and demonstrated the technique for peeling the roots. It was simple enough work, repetitive, the kind of task that allowed the mind to wander while the hands stayed busy. The women talked among themselves as they worked, their conversation flowing around Eliza like a river around a stone. She caught a few words she recognized from Dakota's lesson, tried to piece together meaning from context and tone. Mostly, she just listened, learned the rhythm of their speech, the way they laughed at some shared joke, the comfortable silence that fell between friends who'd worked together long enough that words weren't always necessary. It reminded her of quilting circles back home. Women gathered together, hands busy, voices weaving stories and gossip and wisdom into something larger than any individual piece. The realization was strange, uncomfortable even. These women were supposed to be savage, uncivilized, nothing like the women she'd known in Pennsylvania, in Ohio, in every settlement they'd passed through on the way west. But here they were, doing the same work women everywhere did, talking the same way women everywhere talked, laughing at jokes, sharing burdens, creating community in the spaces between the harder work of survival. When the sun reached its peak, the women distributed the prepared roots to various shelters. The girl who'd invited Eliza gestured for her to bring some to Dakota's shelter. Her shelter now, she supposed, at least for the next 28 days. Inside, Eliza arranged the roots as she'd seen the other women do, storing them in a woven basket that hung from the shelter frame. The domestic nature of the task struck her. How normal it felt to be preparing food stores, organizing a living space, making a shelter into something like a home. How absolutely insane it was that she was doing it here, in an Apache camp, preparing a life with a man whose language she barely spoke. The shelter flap opened. Dakota entered, followed by two other men. They spoke in rapid bursts, their tones serious. Planning something, Eliza thought, or discussing news, something important enough to furrow Dakota's brow and make the other men gesture emphatically. One of them noticed Eliza and said something to Dakota, a question, judging by the inflection. Dakota's response was brief but seemed to satisfy them. The men nodded to her, acknowledgement, if not quite welcome, and left. Dakota turned to Eliza. He looked tired, she realized, the kind of tired that came from carrying heavy responsibilities. Sit, she said, gesturing to the furs by the fire. Rest. He understood the gesture, if not the words. A faint smile crossed his face, the first real expression of warmth she'd seen from him. He sat, and Eliza found herself moving without thinking, adding wood to the fire, preparing water to heat. The actions were automatic. Years of caring for Thomas, of managing a household, of making herself useful so she'd be kept around. But here, the motivation felt different. She wasn't performing for approval or out of fear. She was just helping. Because he looked tired. Because she could. Because something in her wanted to ease the burden she could see weighing on his shoulders. When she offered him water, their fingers brushed. Dakota's eyes met hers, and for a moment the shelter felt smaller, more intimate. The boundary he'd established between their sleeping spaces seemed both vast and insignificant. "Thank you," he said in careful English. "You're welcome," Eliza replied. They sat in comfortable silence, the fire crackling between them. Outside, the camp sounds continued, children laughing, dogs barking, women calling to each other. The ordinary sounds of life continuing. Inside, something shifted. A small thing, barely noticeable. But Eliza felt it like a change in the weather, like the first breath of spring after a long winter. The beginning of something she couldn't name yet, something that felt dangerously close to hope. The days that followed settled into a rhythm Eliza had never known before. Steady, purposeful, and strangely peaceful despite the strangeness of everything around her. She woke each morning to the sound of the camp stirring, the low murmur of voices, and the crackle of fires being coaxed back to life. Dakota was always awake before her, already dressed and moving about with quiet efficiency. He would leave bread and dried meat near her sleeping furs. Simple food, but more than she'd had in weeks. Then he would go, allowing her the privacy to wake and dress without scrutiny. It was a small kindness, one she hadn't expected and didn't quite know how to acknowledge. The girl who'd first brought her to work with the women, Eliza had learned her name was Kimimela, though she couldn't pronounce it properly yet, came for her most mornings. Together they would join the other women in whatever tasks the day required. Tanning hides, gathering wood, preparing food, mending clothing. The endless work of survival that looked the same whether you were Apache or white, living in a hide shelter or a wooden cabin. The women were gradually warming to her presence. Not warmly, exactly, but with less suspicion. They corrected her when she made mistakes, showed her the proper techniques, and occasionally even smiled when she managed to get something right. The older woman who'd first allowed her to join their circle, Eliza had heard others call her Makota, watched her with sharp eyes that missed nothing, but the scrutiny felt less hostile now, more evaluative, like a teacher assessing a student's potential. Eliza absorbed everything she could, not just the work, but the language. She listened constantly, picking up words and phrases, testing them in her mind before trying them aloud. Kimimela was patient with her stumbling attempts, repeating words until Eliza's tongue could shape the sounds properly. The other women would sometimes laugh at her pronunciation, but it wasn't cruel laughter, more like the gentle teasing of sisters. It reminded her of learning to bake bread with her mother, back when she was small enough to stand on a stool to reach the counter. The way her mother would correct her kneading technique, firm but not harsh. The way the kitchen had smelled of yeast and warmth and safety. She pushed the memory away. That world was gone. This was her reality now, at least for the next 3 weeks. In the evenings, when the work was done and the camp settled into the quiet hours before sleep, Dakota would return to the shelter. Sometimes he brought fresh meat from a hunt. Sometimes just himself, tired and dusty from whatever tasks had occupied his day. He never demanded anything from her, never expected her to serve him or cater to his needs. Instead, they would sit by the fire and he would continue teaching her his language, pointing to objects and repeating their names until she could say them back to him without hesitation. "Chill," he would say, holding up Sage. "Chill," Eliza would repeat, the clicking sound in the middle of the word still difficult for her to master. He would nod, patient as stone. "Good." Again. Some evenings they barely spoke at all, simply existing in the same space with a companionability that shouldn't have been possible between two people who'd met less than a week ago. He would work on his weapons, sharpening blades or repairing arrows, while she sewed patches onto clothing or tried her hand at the intricate beadwork the other women made look effortless. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was the opposite, a quietness that felt almost restful, like the pause between breaths. On the 7th night, as Eliza struggled with a particularly stubborn piece of leather she was trying to soften, Dakota spoke without looking up from the arrow he was fletching. "You learn fast," he said in English. The words were still halting, his accent thick, but clearer than they'd been a week ago. He was learning too, she realized, picking up her language while she learned his. "I have good teachers," Eliza replied, keeping her eyes on her work. "The women, they accept you." It wasn't quite a question, but she heard the uncertainty beneath the statement. He was asking if she was all right, If the integration into the camp's daily life was going smoothly, or if she was suffering in ways he couldn't see. "They're teaching me," she said carefully. "I don't know if they accept me yet, but they're teaching me." Dakota nodded slowly. He set down the arrow and looked at her directly, his dark eyes serious in the firelight. "You stay for work? Or you stay because you want?" The question caught her off guard. She'd been so focused on surviving each day, on learning enough to function within the camp structure, that she hadn't allowed herself to examine her own motivations too closely. "I don't know yet," she admitted. "Ask me in 3 weeks." His mouth quirked, that almost smile that softened his severe features. Fair answer. He returned to his work, and Eliza returned to hers. But something had shifted. He cared whether she was here by choice or by obligation. He cared enough to ask, to give her space to figure out the answer for herself. It was more consideration than Thomas had ever shown in 3 years of marriage. The thought should have made her feel guilty, should have conjured Thomas's memory, reminded her that she was a widow who should be mourning, not sitting in an Apache shelter learning to work leather while a warrior asked if she was happy. But guilt didn't come. Only a strange sense of relief, like setting down a burden she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. On the 9th day, Kimimela brought her to the creek, the same creek where Eliza had been captured, though the location felt different now, less like the site of her defeat and more like just another part of the landscape. Several women were already there, washing clothes and bathing in the cold water. They called out greetings to Kimimela, their voices bright with the easy camaraderie of friends. When they saw Eliza, the conversation didn't stop, though a few of them studied her with renewed interest. Kimimela said something that made the others laugh. One of them, a woman close to Eliza's age with a baby strapped to her back, responded with what sounded like a teasing question. "What did she ask?" Eliza whispered to Kimimela. The girl's eyes danced with mischief. "She asked if Dakota is good husband." Heat flooded Eliza's face. It's not like that." Kimimela translated, which only made the women laugh harder. The one with the baby said something else, her tone playful, but not unkind. "She say Dakota is good man," Kimimela explained. "Strong, brave. She say you are lucky." "It's only for a month," Eliza protested. "It's temporary, just until I decide what to do." But even as she said it, the words felt hollow. She'd been here 9 days, and already the idea of leaving, of walking away from the shelter, the routine, the slow building of connection, felt less like freedom and more like loss. The women continued their washing and bathing, drawing Eliza into their activities with gestures and broken phrases. They showed her how to scrub clothes against the smooth river rocks, how to wring water from leather without damaging it. The baby on the woman's back fussed, and without thinking, Eliza reached out to soothe him, making soft sounds that transcended language. The mother watched her with sharp eyes. Then she smiled, a real smile, warm and approving, and said something to the other women. "She say you will be good mother," Kimimela translated quietly. The words hit Eliza like a physical blow. She'd never thought about children. Thomas had wanted them, talked about them constantly during their journey west. Sons to help work the land, daughters to care for the household. But Eliza had felt only dread at the prospect, knowing that pregnancy would make her even more vulnerable, more trapped in a life that already felt like a cage. Now, holding this stranger's baby while his mother washed clothes in a creek, the idea didn't fill her with dread. It filled her with something closer to longing. She handed the baby back quickly, unsettled by her own reaction. The mother accepted him with another smile, bouncing him gently as she returned to her work. That night, Eliza couldn't sleep. She lay on her furs, staring at the shelter's ceiling, listening to Dakota's steady breathing from his side of the space. The boundary between them had never felt more significant. He'd kept his word, hadn't touched her, hadn't demanded anything, had given her the space and time he'd promised. But part of her was starting to wonder if she wanted that space, if the distance between them was protection or just another kind of prison. "You are awake," Dakota said softly, his voice cutting through the darkness. Eliza startled. "I thought you were sleeping." Your breathing changed. A pause. "Something troubles you." She could lie, could say she was fine, that nothing was wrong, but the darkness made honesty easier somehow. "The women at the creek today," she began. "They asked about you, about us." "What did you tell them?" "That it's temporary, that I'm only here for a month." Silence stretched between them. Then Dakota spoke again, his voice measured. Is that what you want? For it to be temporary? I don't know what I want, Eliza admitted. A month ago, I wanted to reach California, to start a new life with my husband, to find gold and build a future. Now my husband is dead, California might as well be on the moon, and I'm living in an Apache camp learning to tan hides. Nothing is what I thought it would be. Is that bad? The question was simple, but it hit at the heart of everything. Was this bad? Being here, in this strange new life that bore no resemblance to anything she'd planned or expected? No, she said slowly. It's not bad. It's just different. Strange. I don't know if I belong here. Do you belong anywhere else? The words weren't cruel, just factual, a recognition of the truth they both knew, that she had nowhere else to go, no one waiting for her, no life to return to even if she wanted to. No, Eliza whispered. I don't belong anywhere. She heard rustling as Dakota shifted on his furs. Then maybe you belong here. Maybe you build belonging, not find it. The wisdom in his words settled over her like a blanket. Building belonging, creating a place for herself rather than waiting for one to appear. It was a foreign concept, radical in its simplicity. Is that what you did? She asked. Built your belonging here? I was born here, Dakota said. But yes, every day I build it, every choice, every action. Belonging is not gift, is work. Eliza absorbed that. The idea that belonging wasn't something you were given, but something you created through daily effort. Through choosing to be present, to contribute, to connect. The women today, she said, they were kind to me. Kimimela teaches me every day. Even Makota doesn't glare at me anymore. Is that building belonging? Yes, Dakota said simply. And you teach them too. What could I possibly teach them? That outsider can become insider. That difference does not mean enemy. His voice carried conviction. You show them new way to see. That is valuable. Eliza had never thought of herself as teaching anyone anything. She'd been too busy trying to survive, to adapt, to not make waves or draw attention. The idea that her presence alone could be a lesson worth learning was both humbling and empowering. Thank you, she said into the darkness. For what? For seeing me, for treating me like I matter. Dakota was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was softer. You do matter, Eliza. Here, you matter. The words wrapped around her heart and squeezed. She'd spent so long being invisible, being useful but not valued, being a body that performed functions but not a person with worth. To be told she mattered, and to believe the person saying it actually meant it, was almost too much to bear. Sleep finally came, and with it dreams of belonging that felt less like fantasy and more like possibility. The second week brought new challenges. A hunting party returned with news of soldiers' 3 days' ride to the east. The information rippled through the camp like wind through grass, bringing tension and low, urgent conversations. Eliza didn't understand most of what was being said, but she understood enough to know that soldiers meant danger. Dakota was gone more often after that, away from camp with the other men for hours at a time. When he returned, he looked troubled, his shoulders tight with stress. The council meetings grew longer, the discussions more heated. Eliza asked Kimimela what was happening. The girl's face grew serious. Soldiers come closer, looking for us. Say we raid their settlements, steal their horses. Not true, but they come anyway. What will you do? Kimimela shrugged, but her eyes were worried. We move maybe, or we hide, or we fight. She touched Eliza's arm. You should not worry. Dakota will keep you safe. But Eliza was worried, not just for herself, but for all of them. For Kimimela and Makota and the woman with the baby. For the children who played their stone games without knowing that soldiers were hunting their families. For Dakota, who carried the weight of protection on his shoulders. That evening, Dakota returned to the shelter later than usual. His face was drawn, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. Eliza had kept the fire going, had prepared food from their stores, had water ready for him without being asked. He accepted the water with a nod of thanks and drank deeply. Then he sat heavily by the fire, staring into the flames with eyes that saw things she couldn't. Bad news? Eliza asked quietly. Complicated news, Dakota replied. His English was improving daily, the words coming more easily now. Soldiers come because they think we attack their people. We did not, but they come anyway. What will you do? Move camp, probably. Go deeper into mountains where soldiers cannot follow easily. He looked at her directly. Will be hard journey, cold, dangerous. Eliza understood what he wasn't saying. He was giving her an out, a chance to leave before things got more difficult, to find her way to the soldiers and return to white civilization before the camp moved somewhere she couldn't follow. I'll help pack, she said instead. Dakota's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Relief, maybe? Or respect. You're sure? I'm sure. He nodded slowly. We leave in 3 days. Take only what we can carry. Everything else we leave behind or burn. The finality of it struck her. These people were being driven from their home because of crimes they hadn't committed, forced to abandon everything they'd built because soldiers couldn't tell the difference between one Apache band and another. I'm sorry, Eliza said. This isn't right. Right and wrong do not matter to soldiers, Dakota said, his voice bitter. Only orders matter. They sat in silence, the fire crackling between them. Eliza thought about the life she'd left behind, about the wagon train pushing west with the certainty that the land they claimed was theirs for the taking, about the stories she'd heard of Indian raids and massacres, never questioning whether those stories were true or whose perspective they represented. She'd been so certain of her place in the world, so sure that civilization was pushing westward toward progress, that the people in its path were obstacles to be moved or eliminated. Now she sat on the other side of that certainty, and the view looked very different. Dakota, she said carefully, why did you offer me this choice? Why not just keep me as a captive, or let me die, or trade me back to the soldiers? He considered the question for a long time. When he finally spoke, his words were measured. My mother was Mexican, captured young, given choice like I give you. She chose to stay. She chose my father, chose this life. She teach me that choice makes stronger bond than force ever can. He met Eliza's eyes. I see you at creek, alone and dying. I see woman who fight even when she has no chance. I think this woman deserves choice, deserves to decide her own path. Your mother, Eliza said softly. Is she still here? She died 3 winters ago, sickness. His face remained impassive, but grief lived in his eyes. But her teaching stays, her choice stays. She never regrets staying. She tell me that every day until she die. Eliza's throat tightened. I'm sorry for your loss. I am sorry for yours, Dakota replied. You lose husband, lose wagon, lose everything you carry west. That is hard. It was, Eliza agreed. But maybe I needed to lose those things to find something else. What you find? She looked around the shelter, at the organized space, the carefully maintained fire, the boundary Dakota had established and respected for 2 weeks now, at the life she was building here, stitch by stitch, word by word, choice by choice. I'm still figuring that out, she admitted, but I think it might be worth staying to find out. Dakota's almost smile appeared, transforming his severe features into something warmer. Good answer, he said, echoing his words from a week ago. Very good answer. The next 3 days were chaos organized by long practice. The women took down shelters, packed essential items, buried things they hoped to retrieve later. The men scouted routes, discussed strategy, prepared weapons. The children, sensing the tension, grew quieter, their games more subdued. Eliza worked alongside the women, following Makota's directions as they sorted through supplies. The older woman's earlier suspicion had transformed into something like approval as she watched Eliza work without complaint, carrying heavy bundles and helping with the difficult task of deciding what to take and what to leave behind. You are strong, Makota said in Apache, speaking slowly so Eliza could understand. Stronger than you look. I had a good teacher, Eliza replied in halting Apache, gesturing toward Makota. The old woman's face creased in what might have been a smile. She said something else, too fast for Eliza to catch all the words, but the tone was kind, almost affectionate. Kimimela, working nearby, translated. She say you learn fast because you listen instead of talk. She say that is rare gift. The compliment settled warm in Eliza's chest. She'd spent so much of her life being told she talked too much, asked too many questions, should be quieter and more obedient. To be praised for listening felt like vindication. On the third night, the night before they would leave, Dakota returned to the shelter with something in his hands. He held it out to Eliza, a knife in a leather sheath, the blade sharp and well made. "For you," he said, "for protection, for work, for whatever you need." Eliza took it carefully, feeling the weight of it in her palm. It was a good knife, far better than the one she'd lost when they'd captured her. The sheath was decorated with simple beadwork, nothing fancy, but carefully done. "Did you make this?" she asked. "Sheath, yes. Knife, no. Knife is old. Was my mother's." He met her eyes. "She would want you to have it. She would want you to be able to protect yourself." The significance of the gift overwhelmed her. He was giving her his mother's knife, a weapon that had belonged to another woman who'd been given a choice, who'd chosen to stay, who'd never regretted it. "I can't take this," Eliza whispered. "It's too important." "But that is why you must take it," Dakota said firmly. "Important things should go to people who will use them well. You will use it well." Eliza's fingers closed around the sheath. "Thank you. I'll take care of it." "I know you will." He paused, then added, "Tomorrow will be hard, long walk, difficult terrain. If you need help, you ask. No shame in asking." "I'll manage," Eliza said, more confidently than she felt. "I know that too," Dakota said. "But sometimes managing is easier with help." That night, Eliza lay awake again, the knife resting beside her furs. Outside, the camp was quiet, with the weighted silence of people trying to rest before a difficult journey. She thought about Dakota's mother, about a Mexican woman who'd been given a choice and had chosen this life, who'd raised a son who believed in giving others the same choice she'd been given. She thought about the 2 weeks she'd spent here, learning and working and slowly finding her place, about the women who'd taught her, the routines that had become familiar, the language that was starting to feel less foreign on her tongue. She thought about Dakota, patient and respectful, teaching her his language and trusting her with his mother's knife, about the way he looked at her sometimes, like she was a puzzle he was trying to solve, or maybe a hope he was afraid to believe in. The month wasn't over yet. She still had 2 weeks to decide. But lying there in the darkness, listening to the camp prepare for exile, Eliza realized that somewhere in the past 14 days, the decision had already been made. She just hadn't admitted it to herself yet. Dawn came cold and gray, the sun hidden behind heavy clouds that promised rain or possibly snow. The camp broke down the last of the shelters in efficient silence, years of practice evident in every movement. Bundles were distributed, children secured on their mothers' backs, the elderly given lighter loads. Eliza carried what Makota assigned her, a bundle of tools and dried food, heavy but manageable. The older woman had given her an appraising look before handing over the pack, as if testing whether Eliza would complain or accept the burden without argument. Eliza had simply shouldered the pack and asked what else needed carrying. Makota's nod of approval had been all the reward she needed. The march began as the sun finally broke through the clouds, painting the mountains in shades of gold and amber. They walked in a loose column, the strongest warriors ranging ahead and behind to watch for danger. Dakota was everywhere at once, checking on the elderly, helping redistribute loads when someone struggled, conferring with the other men about the route. He caught Eliza's eye once as he passed, his expression serious but not unkind. She nodded to show she was managing. His almost smile flickered across his face before he moved on to the next person who needed his attention. They walked through the morning and into the afternoon, stopping only briefly for water and rest. The terrain grew rougher as they climbed higher into the mountains, the path narrowing to a rocky trail that required careful footing. Eliza's legs burned. Her shoulders ached from the pack, but she kept walking. Around her, women twice her age carried heavier loads without complaint. Children barely old enough to walk kept pace without whining. If they could manage, so could she. As the sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, they finally stopped. The new camp would be here, in a small valley sheltered by rock formations that would hide their fires and provide protection from the wind. The work began immediately. Eliza helped where she was directed, erecting shelters alongside women whose names she was finally learning. Naira, who'd asked if Dakota was a good husband. Chosovi, whose baby boy had a smile that could melt stone. Helona, quiet and watchful, who communicated more through gestures than words. By the time full darkness fell, the new camp was functional, if not fully established. Fires burned in the shelter of the rocks. Food was distributed. People collapsed onto furs and blankets with the exhaustion of a hard day's work completed. Dakota found Eliza sitting by the fire in their newly erected shelter, too tired to do more than stare into the flames. He sat beside her without speaking, his own exhaustion evident in the way he moved. "You did well today," he said finally. "Very well." "I just walked," Eliza replied. "Everyone else did the real work." "You walked with us. You carried your share. You helped build this new home." He gestured at the shelter around them. "That is real work." Eliza looked at him, really looked at him. At the lines of fatigue around his eyes, the set of his shoulders that spoke of responsibility carried without complaint. At the man who'd given her a choice when he could have given her orders, who'd respected her boundaries when he could have ignored them, who'd trusted her with his mother's knife and his people's safety. "Dakota," she said quietly, "I don't need the full month." He went very still. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I've made my choice." Her heart hammered against her ribs, but her voice stayed steady. "I'm staying, not because I have nowhere else to go, though that's true too, but because I want to stay. Because this feels more like home than anywhere else I've ever been. Because you've given me something no one else ever has." "What is that?" His voice was low, careful. "Respect," Eliza said simply. "You see me as a person, not as property. You give me choices instead of orders. You've been patient and kind when you could have been neither." She took a breath. "I want to stay, if you'll have me. Not just for the rest of the month, but for as long as you'll let me." Dakota's eyes searched her face in the firelight. "You are certain. This life will not be easy. Soldiers will hunt us. Winters will be hard. You will always be outsider to some people." "I'm certain," Eliza said. "I'd rather be an outsider here, where I'm valued, than accepted somewhere I'm invisible." The almost smile transformed into something fuller, brighter, real joy breaking through his usual reserve. "Then you stay," Dakota said, "for as long as you want, for always, if you choose." "I choose always," Eliza whispered. Dakota reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. When she didn't, his hand cupped her face with a gentleness that made her breath catch. His thumb traced her cheekbone, his touch reverent. "I see you, Eliza," he said softly. "I see your strength, your courage, your kind heart. I see all of you, and I am honored you choose to stay." Eliza leaned into his touch, tears pricking her eyes. For the first time in her life, she felt completely, utterly seen. Not as a daughter who should be more obedient, not as a wife who should be more grateful, not as a woman who should be less of herself. Just as Eliza, whole and valued and enough exactly as she was. "Thank you," she whispered, "for seeing me, for giving me this chance." Dakota pulled her close, and Eliza went willingly, resting her head against his chest and listening to the steady beat of his heart. Around them, the camp settled into the rhythms of night. But here, in this shelter they'd built together, surrounded by the warmth of the fire and the promise of a future she was choosing for herself, Eliza felt something she hadn't felt in years. She felt home. They stayed like that until the fire burned low, neither speaking, both content to exist in the quiet certainty of a decision made and accepted. When Dakota finally pulled back, his hand lingered on her face for a moment longer before falling away. "You should rest," he said, his voice rough. "Tomorrow we finish setting up camp. Much work ahead." Eliza nodded, though rest felt impossible with her heart still racing from the declaration she'd made. She moved to her furs, acutely aware that the boundary between their sleeping spaces suddenly felt less like protection and more like an obstacle. But Dakota had never pushed, never demanded, and she wouldn't either. Whatever was growing between them would unfold in its own time. She closed her eyes and listened to him settling onto his own furs, the rustle of leather and wool familiar now. Sleep came easier than she expected, carrying her into dreams of mountains and smoke and a hand reaching for hers in the darkness. Morning brought activity that swept Eliza into its current before she'd fully woken. Makota appeared at the shelter entrance, speaking rapid Apache, that Eliza only half understood, but whose urgency was clear. She dressed quickly and followed the older woman out into the gray pre-dawn light. The women were gathering near the largest fire, their faces serious. Makota gestured for Eliza to join them, and she did, standing beside Kimimela, who gave her a small, nervous smile. An older woman Eliza hadn't met before, her hair white as snow, her face carved by years of sun and wind, stood before them. She spoke in a voice that carried authority despite its softness, and Eliza recognized the cadence of something ceremonial, something important. "She speaks of the old ways," Kimimela whispered, translating quietly, "of how women hold the heart of the people, how we carry life, carry tradition, carry the future in our hands." The girl paused, listening. She says, "New blood strengthens the people, that outsiders who choose to join us bring gifts we cannot see yet." The white-haired woman's eyes found Eliza in the growing light. She said something directly to her, the words flowing like water. "She says you chose to stay when you could have left," Kimimela translated, her voice soft with wonder. "She says that choice makes you sister, that blood does not make family, choice makes family." Eliza's throat tightened. The old woman approached, moving with the careful deliberation of age, and placed both hands on Eliza's shoulders. She spoke again, shorter this time, and Kimimela's translation came with tears in her voice. She says, "Welcome home, daughter of the mountain, welcome home." Then the old woman embraced her, and the other women pressed close, their hands touching Eliza's arms, her back, her hair. Not restraining, but welcoming, including, claiming her as one of their own in a way that transcended language or culture. When they finally stepped back, Eliza's cheeks were wet, and she didn't care who saw. Naira pressed something into her hands, a small pouch decorated with intricate beadwork. Chosovi added a bracelet made of woven leather and stone. Halona gave her a length of fabric dyed deep blue, soft as a whisper. Gifts. They were giving her gifts, marking her acceptance into their circle with tangible symbols of belonging. "Thank you," Eliza managed in Apache, the words clumsy but sincere. "Thank you all." Makota spoke, her tone brisk now, practical. The ceremony was over, work remained. But as the women dispersed to their tasks, she caught Eliza's arm and held her back. "You are a brave woman," she said in careful, slow Apache. "To choose this life when you know nothing of it. To trust when you have been given no reason to trust." She paused, searching for words. "Takota is a good man. He will honor your choice. But this life, it will test you. Will you stay strong when it is hard?" "I will," Eliza said, meeting the old woman's eyes squarely. "I chose this. I'll see it through." Makota nodded, satisfied. "Good. Now come. We have much to do, and talking does not soften hides." The work that followed was exhausting but purposeful. The new camp needed everything the old one had: food stores organized, water sources established, hunting areas scouted. The women worked with practiced efficiency, their movements coordinated by years of doing this exact thing whenever danger or necessity demanded relocation. Eliza worked alongside them, her hands learning the rhythms of hide working, food preparation, the endless tasks that kept a community fed and clothed and sheltered. Her Apache improved daily out of pure necessity, the language becoming less foreign as her tongue learned to shape the sounds properly. 3 days after they'd arrived at the new camp, Takota returned from a scouting expedition with news that brought the council together in urgent discussion. Eliza watched from a distance as the men gathered, their voices low and tense. Whatever Takota had found, it wasn't good. When he finally returned to their shelter, the sun was setting and his face was drawn with worry. "The soldiers are closer than we thought," he said without preamble. "They found our old camp. They are following our trail." Fear spiked cold in Eliza's chest. "How close?" 2 days, maybe 3. They move slower than we did. They have wagons, supplies, but they are coming." He sat heavily by the fire. "The council debates what to do. Some want to run deeper into the mountains. Others want to split up, confuse the trail. And some—" He trailed off. "Some what?" "Some want to fight," Takota said quietly. "To stop running and make a stand." Eliza's hand stilled on the leather she'd been working. What do you want to do? He looked at her, surprise flickering across his features. Why does that matter? Because I live here now. Because your decision affects me too. Because I want to know what you think. Dakota studied her for a long moment. Then he sighed, rubbing his face with both hands. I think fighting is foolish. We are outnumbered. They have better weapons, more supplies. Fighting means death for many of our people. He paused. But running also has cost. We run and run and run, and each time we leave more behind. Each time we go deeper into mountains where food is scarce and winters are harsh. Eventually there will be nowhere left to run. So what's the answer? I do not know, he admitted. That is the problem. Every choice leads to suffering. I just have to choose which suffering is least. Eliza set down her work and moved to sit beside him. Can I tell you something? He nodded. Back in Pennsylvania, before Thomas and I left for California, I asked him what we'd do if things went wrong. If the wagon broke down, if someone got sick, if we ran out of money. She stared into the fire. He told me worrying about problems before they happened was foolish. That men made decisions and women followed them, and that was how things worked. That is not how things work here, Dakota said. I know. Eliza turned to face him. Here, you're asking what I think. You're including me in the decision, even though you don't have to. That means more to me than you know. So what do you think? He asked. Should we run or fight? I think you should do what keeps the most people alive, Eliza said carefully. But I also think running forever isn't living. At some point, you have to make a stand. Maybe not this time, if the odds are too bad, but eventually. Dakota's almost smile appeared. You sound like the warriors who want to fight. I sound like someone who's tired of being chased, Eliza corrected. There's a difference between wanting to fight and understanding that sometimes you have to. He reached for her hand, laced his fingers through hers. The touch was casual, comfortable, speaking to an intimacy that had been building slowly over weeks. You are a wise woman, Eliza. I am lucky you chose to stay. I'm lucky you gave me the choice. They sat in silence, hands joined, watching the fire burn. Outside, the camp settled into evening routines, children being called inside, fires being banked, the low murmur of conversation winding down. Normal sounds of normal life, even in the face of approaching danger. The council will decide tomorrow, Dakota said eventually. I will argue for going deeper into mountains. It is safer, even if it is harder. But I will accept whatever the council chooses. And I'll accept it with you, Eliza said. He squeezed her hand. You do not have to. You could go to the soldiers. Tell them you were captive, that you want to return to your people. They would take you, give you safe passage to nearest fort. My people are here now, Eliza said firmly. The soldiers aren't coming to rescue me. They're coming to destroy my home. I'm not helping them do that. The words settled between them, heavy with implication. She'd called this place home, called these people hers, and she meant it with a certainty that surprised even herself. Dakota lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. The gesture was tender, reverent, full of unspoken emotion. I see you, Eliza Ward, he said softly, and I am honored to call you mine. I see you too, Dakota, she whispered back, and I'm honored to be yours. The distance between them dissolved. He cupped her face with both hands and kissed her with a gentleness that made her ache. It wasn't desperate or demanding, it was patient, thorough, a promise wrapped in physical form. Eliza kissed him back, pouring everything she couldn't say into the connection between them. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Dakota rested his forehead against hers. I have waited a long time for this, he admitted, since the day you chose to stay. But I wanted you to be certain, wanted you to choose me, not just safety. I am certain, Eliza said, and I am choosing you. Not because you saved me or because I have nowhere else to go, but because you see me and value me and treat me like an equal. She smiled. That's worth more than all the gold in California. He kissed her again, deeper this time, and Eliza felt the last walls between them crumble into dust. When he pulled back, his eyes held a question. She answered it by taking his hand and drawing him toward the firs where they slept. Not to the separate spaces they'd maintained since that first night, but to the center where the boundary had been. Where there was no his or hers, only theirs. Dakota followed, his movements slow and deliberate, giving her every opportunity to change her mind. But Eliza's mind was made. She'd chosen this life, this man, this future, and she was done waiting for it to begin. The night that followed was gentle and fierce by turns, a claiming that went both ways. Dakota touched her like she was precious, like he couldn't quite believe she was real. Eliza responded with equal reverence, learning the planes of his body, the scars that mapped his history, the places that made him gasp her name. There was awkwardness, too, two people learning each other's rhythms, figuring out what pleased and what didn't. But even the awkward moments held tenderness, punctuated by soft laughter and whispered reassurances. When they finally lay tangled together in the aftermath, Eliza felt transformed, not because of the physical act itself, but because of what it represented. A choice freely made, a partnership freely entered, a future freely claimed. "No regrets?" Dakota murmured against her hair. "None," Eliza said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. They slept wrapped around each other, and when morning came, Eliza woke to find herself still held close, Dakota's arm heavy across her waist. She lay there listening to his breathing, marveling at the strange path that had brought her here. From a starving widow dying alone in the wilderness to a woman held safe in the arms of a man who valued her, respected her, chose her as completely as she'd chosen him. Outside, the camp was already stirring. Voices called to each other, fires crackled to life. The business of living continued, and somewhere beyond the mountains, soldiers were coming, bringing threat and violence and the specter of everything Eliza had left behind. But here, in this shelter, in these arms, she was home, and she would fight to protect it with everything she had. The council met at midday, the men gathering in the center of camp while the women worked nearby, close enough to hear but maintaining the fiction of separation. Eliza sat with Kimimela and Naira, her hands busy with hide-working while her ears strained to catch every word. The debate was heated. She couldn't follow all of it. The speakers talked too fast, used words she hadn't learned yet. But the general positions were clear. Some argued for immediate flight deeper into the mountains. Others insisted that fighting now, while they had the advantage of terrain, was the smarter choice. A few suggested sending scouts to parley with the soldiers, to explain that they weren't the raiders the army sought. That suggestion was met with bitter laughter, as if soldiers had ever cared whether they were killing the right Apaches. Dakota spoke last, his voice calm but carrying across the gathering. Eliza watched him stand before the council, shoulders straight, face composed. He spoke for several minutes, his words measured and clear. She caught phrases here and there: protect the people, survive to fight another day, wisdom of our ancestors. When he finished, the council fell silent. The old man who'd spoken at Eliza's arrival, she'd learned his name was Kale, and he was the band's chief, nodded slowly. He said something brief, and several of the men grunted agreement. "They will go deeper into mountains," Kimimela whispered. Dakota convinced them. "They leave tomorrow at dawn." Relief flooded through Eliza, not because she was afraid to fight, but because she knew fighting would mean losing people she'd come to care for. Makota's wisdom, Kimimela's kindness, Naira's teasing, Chosovi's baby's smile. Every person here mattered, and running meant keeping them alive. That night, the camp prepared for another departure with grim efficiency. People who'd just finished setting up their shelters began taking them down again. The women sorted through supplies with even more ruthless pragmatism than before, leaving behind anything that wasn't essential. Eliza worked alongside them, her body aching from the previous day's labor, but her hands steady. When Makota handed her a bundle to pack, she noticed the older woman watching her with speculative eyes. "You're different today," Makota said in Apache. "Something has changed." Eliza felt heat rise to her cheeks but met the woman's gaze steadily. "I made my choice, fully." Makota's weathered face creased in what might have been approval. "Good. Dakota is good man. He needs strong woman beside him. You are strong enough, I think." "I hope so," Eliza said honestly. "Hope is for children," Makota said briskly. "You must know, must be certain. Dakota carries much responsibility. He needs partner who will not break when things are hard." "I won't break," Eliza said, putting steel in her voice. "I've already been broken. I know how to survive it. And I know how to become stronger in the broken places. Makota studied her for a long moment. Then she nodded, satisfied. Yes, you understand. That is good. She handed Eliza another bundle. Now work. Tomorrow we walk again, and walking does not wait for feelings. The departure came with gray dawn and cold that bit through layers of clothing. The camp moved in near silence, everyone understanding that noise carried in these mountains, and soldiers might be closer than any of them wanted to believe. Eliza walked beside Naira, helping to steady the woman when the trail grew rough. Chosovi's baby rode secure on his mother's back, his dark eyes solemn as he watched the world pass. The other children walked without complaint, their small faces set with determination that broke Eliza's heart. They climbed higher, the air thinning, breath coming harder. The trail narrowed to barely more than a goat path in places, forcing them into single file. Eliza's legs burned, her lungs ached, but she kept moving. Around her, women twice her age carried heavier loads without faltering. If they could manage, so could she. By midday, they'd climbed above the tree line into country so barren and beautiful, it stole what little breath Eliza had left. Rock and sky and the thin scratch of hardy plants clinging to existence in impossible places. The wind here was constant, carrying the promise of winter that would come soon and stay long. They made camp that night in a shallow cave that had clearly been used before, old fire marks on the stone, worn places where furs had been laid. Dakota helped set up their shelter just inside the cave's mouth, positioning it to block the wind while allowing smoke to escape. "We will stay here for a while," he said as they worked, "until we know the soldiers have given up or gone another direction." "How long is a while?" "Weeks, maybe longer." He glanced at her. "It will be cold. Food will be scarce. Are you certain you do not want to go back?" Eliza stopped working and faced him squarely. "How many times are you going to ask me that?" "Until I am certain you understand what you are choosing." "I understand perfectly," Eliza said. "I'm choosing cold and hunger and uncertainty with people who value me over comfort and safety, with people who see me as property." "That's not a hard choice, Dakota. That's the easiest choice I've ever made." His expression softened. "You shame me with your courage." "Good," Eliza said tartly. "Maybe it'll convince you to stop asking if I want to leave." He laughed. A real laugh, full and genuine. The sound echoed off the cave walls, drawing smiles from the people working nearby. Even here, even in the face of danger and hardship, there was room for laughter. That night, huddled together against the cold, Dakota told her stories of his childhood, of his mother teaching him both Apache ways and the Spanish songs she'd brought from her own childhood, of his father, a warrior respected for his wisdom as much as his strength, of learning to hunt, to track, to read the land like a language. "My mother used to say that every ending is also a beginning," he said, his breath warm against Eliza's ear. "When she was captured, she thought her life was over, but it was just beginning in a way she never expected." "Do you think she was happy?" Eliza asked. "Truly happy, not just making the best of a bad situation?" Dakota was quiet for a long moment. "I think she chose to be happy. I think she looked at her life and decided that happiness was possible, so she made it possible." He tightened his arm around her. "Like you are doing." "I'm not making happiness," Eliza protested. "I'm just living." "Living is choosing happiness," Dakota said simply. "Every day, every moment. You could choose bitterness, anger, regret, but you choose different. You choose to see value in this life, in these people, in me. That is bravery more powerful than any warrior's courage." Eliza turned in his arms to face him. In the dim light of their banked fire, his features were half in shadow, but his eyes held steady on hers. "You make it easy to choose happiness," she said softly. "You and Kimimela and Makota and all the others. You've given me something I never had before." "What is that?" "A place where I matter, where my work means something and my voice is heard and my choices are my own." She cupped his face with her hand. "You've given me myself back. I didn't even realize I'd lost it until you helped me find it again." Dakota kissed her palm. "You were never lost, just waiting to be seen." They made love slowly that night, muffling sounds against each other's skin, mindful of the thin walls and close quarters. But the connection between them burned no less intensely for the need for quiet. If anything, the restraint made it more powerful. Every touch deliberate, every movement intentional. Afterward, Eliza lay against Dakota's chest and listened to his heartbeat slow. Around them, the camp settled into sleep's rhythm. She thought about the soldiers somewhere behind them, about the cold weeks ahead, about all the uncertainty that stretched before them like the mountains themselves, and found that she wasn't afraid. She'd been tested by loss, by hunger, by the wilderness itself. She'd survived. More than survived, she'd found something worth keeping, worth fighting for, worth choosing every single day. The wind howled outside the cave, but here, wrapped in Dakota's arms and the warmth of a community that had claimed her as their own, Eliza felt safer than she'd ever felt in her entire life. The weeks that followed tested everyone. Food grew scarce despite the hunters' best efforts. The cold deepened, bringing snow that piled against the cave mouth and turned their breath to frost. Children whimpered from hunger before their mothers could quiet them. The elderly grew weaker, their bodies struggling against the altitude and cold. But the community held. The hunters shared every scrap of meat they could find. The women rationed food with fierce efficiency, ensuring the children and elderly ate first. Everyone shared body heat at night, huddling close in a practical intimacy born of survival. Eliza worked harder than she'd ever worked, her hands raw from cold and labor, her body lean from scarce rations. She learned to recognize edible roots buried beneath the snow, to prepare pine bark into something approaching nourishment, to make a little food stretch impossibly far. She also learned the stories. Sitting around fires at night, the older members of the band would tell tales of their history, their heroes, their connection to the land. Eliza listened hungrily, absorbing the narratives that gave context to the people she'd chosen to join. Kimimela was her translator at first, but gradually Eliza needed less help. The language was becoming hers, the words forming patterns she could follow without conscious thought. She dreamed in Apache now, thought in it sometimes, the English of her childhood becoming the foreign tongue. One night, 6 weeks into their exile in the high country, Dakota returned from a scouting expedition with news that brought cautious relief. The soldiers had given up the chase, turned back toward the fort. Winter had accomplished what the mountains couldn't. It had driven the pursuers away. The celebration was muted but genuine. They would survive the winter here, then decide whether to return to lower country or push even deeper into territory the soldiers couldn't easily reach. But for now, the immediate danger had passed. That night, Eliza sat with the other women around the main fire, listening to them sing. The songs were in Apache, but she was beginning to understand them. Songs of endurance, of survival, of the strength of women who'd carried their people through countless winters just like this one. Naira pressed close on one side of her, Kimimela on the other. Chosovi's baby dozed in Eliza's arms, his small weight warm and trusting. Makota caught her eye from across the fire and nodded, the gesture carrying approval and something deeper, acceptance that went beyond mere tolerance. When the singing ended and people began dispersing to their shelters, Makota called Eliza back. The old woman studied her in the firelight, her expression unreadable. "You have proven yourself," Makota said finally. "You work hard. You do not complain. You learn our ways without losing yourself." She paused. "You are one of us now, truly." Eliza's throat tightened. "Thank you. That means everything to me." "I know it does," Makota said. "That is why I give you this." She held out a small bundle wrapped in soft leather. Eliza took it carefully, unwrapping it to reveal a delicate necklace made of silver and turquoise, the craftsmanship exquisite. "This was my daughter's," Makota said quietly. "She died many years ago, before she could wear it. I have kept it, waiting for the right person." Her eyes held Eliza's. "You're the right person. You honor her memory by living fully, by choosing this hard life and making it beautiful anyway." Eliza couldn't speak. Tears blurred her vision as she clutched the necklace, overwhelmed by the significance of the gift. Makota was giving her more than jewelry. She was giving her a place in the lineage, a connection to the past and future of the people. "I'll treasure it," she finally managed. "Always." "I know you will," Makota said. She pulled Eliza into a brief, fierce embrace. "You are my daughter now, in spirit, if not blood. Remember that, when times are hard." When Eliza returned to her shelter, Dakota was waiting. She showed him the necklace, and his eyes widened with recognition. Makota gave you this? At Eliza's nod, he smiled. She honors you greatly. That necklace has been in her family for many generations. For her to give it to you, you are truly one of us now. I know, Eliza whispered. She handed him the necklace. Will you help me put it on? Dakota fastened it around her neck with gentle fingers, then turned her to face him. The turquoise rested cool against her throat, feeling right in a way she couldn't explain. Beautiful, he said softly. It suits you. Eliza touched the stone, feeling its smooth surface beneath her fingertips. I never expected this, any of this. When I was dying by that creek, I never imagined I'd end up here, wearing turquoise given to me by a woman who calls me daughter, speaking a language I'd never heard before, loving a man I'd been taught to fear. Are you glad? Dakota asked. For all of it? Eliza looked at him. At the man who'd given her a choice when he could have given her commands, who'd respected her boundaries while making her feel desired, who'd valued her strength while offering his own. At the life they'd built together in the face of impossible odds. I'm more than glad, she said. I'm grateful. I'm complete. I'm home. He kissed her then, deep and claiming, and Eliza kissed him back with everything she had. The necklace pressed between them, a tangible reminder of the family she'd chosen and the life she was building. Outside, the wind howled and the snow fell, but inside their shelter there was only warmth and certainty and the fierce joy of choosing each other again and again. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Dakota rested his forehead against hers. I love you, Eliza Ward, he said in English, the words careful but certain. I choose you today and always. I love you too, Eliza whispered back, and I choose you for always. The choice had been made weeks ago, but saying it aloud sealed something between them, a promise, a future, a love forged through hardship and choice, and the radical decision to see each other truly. They lay down together on their shared furs, and Eliza fell asleep to the sound of Dakota's heartbeat and the knowledge that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The journey that had started with loss and desperation had led her here, to this moment, to this man, to this impossible and perfect life. And she wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. Winter deepened its hold on the mountains with a ferocity that tested even the most experienced among them. The snow piled higher against the cave mouth, and the hunters returned empty-handed more often than not, their faces grim with the knowledge that game had moved to lower elevations where survival was easier. Eliza watched the children grow thinner, their eyes too large in their small faces, and felt rage burn hot beneath her ribs. Not at anyone in particular, but at the injustice of it all. That these people were driven into the harshest country imaginable because soldiers couldn't tell one band from another, didn't care to try. We need to do something, she said to Dakota one night as they lay together, his body curved around hers for warmth. The children are starving. I know, he said, his voice heavy with frustration. But what can we do? The game is gone. The plants are buried under snow. We have already rationed everything we have. Eliza was quiet for a long moment, an idea forming that she knew would be dangerous but might be necessary. What if someone went down to lower elevation? Not the whole camp, just one or two people who could move fast, hunt, and bring back meat. She felt Dakota go still against her. Too dangerous. Soldiers might still be near. And the weather. One storm could trap someone below, cut them off from camp. But if we don't try, people will die here anyway, Eliza pressed. At least this way there's a chance. Dakota was silent for so long she thought he'd fallen asleep. Then he sighed. I will bring it to council tomorrow. See what others think. The council meeting the next day was tense. Cale listened to Dakota's proposal with a grave face, and the other men immediately began arguing. Some agreed it was worth the risk. Others insisted it was suicide, that losing hunters to foolish ventures would only weaken them further. Eliza sat with the women, listening as the debate grew heated. Finally, unable to contain herself, she stood. Every eye turned to her, some surprised, others disapproving. Women didn't speak in council. It wasn't done. May I say something? She asked in careful Apache, directing her words to Cale. The old chief regarded her for a long moment. Then he nodded. Speak. Eliza took a breath, choosing her words carefully. I know I am new to your ways. I know I have much to learn, but I was raised in a different world, and sometimes an outsider's eyes see things differently. She paused, making sure she had everyone's attention. In my old life, when communities faced hard times, they didn't always solve problems the way they always had. Sometimes they tried new things, combined old wisdom with new ideas. What new idea do you have? One of the warriors asked, his tone skeptical. Send me, Eliza said simply. The reaction was immediate and loud. Men shouted over each other, some laughing at the absurdity, others angry at her presumption. Dakota rose to his feet, his face a mixture of shock and anger. No, he said flatly. Absolutely not. Hear me out, Eliza said, raising her voice to be heard. I'm not Apache. If soldiers find me, I can say I escaped from you. They'll believe it. A white woman alone in the wilderness? They'll think you abandoned me or I got away. They won't hunt the camp because of me. You could die, Dakota said, his voice rough. Cold animals, falling, getting lost. So could any of your hunters, Eliza interrupted. But I have an advantage they don't. I can move through white settlements if I need to. I can trade, buy supplies, get information about soldier movements. Your hunters can't do that without risking their lives. Kale held up a hand for silence. The arguing stopped, though tension still crackled through the group. You would risk this? He asked Eliza. Risk your life for people who are not your blood? They are my blood, Eliza said firmly. Maybe not by birth, but by choice. That makes them family just as much as any other bond. She touched the necklace at her throat. Makota gave me this because she sees me as daughter. Kimimela calls me sister. Naira and Chosovi treat me as one of them. This is my family now. I won't watch my family starve when I might be able to help. Makota stood from where she sat with the women, her weathered face stern. The girl speaks truth, she said, her voice carrying authority. She is one of us, and she is right. She can go places our hunters cannot, can do things they cannot. She looked at Kale. We should consider this. It is too dangerous, Dakota said, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. Living is dangerous, Makota countered, especially for women, but we do it anyway, and we do it well. She looked at Eliza. You are certain? I'm certain. The council debated for another hour, but Eliza could feel the tide turning. Her offer had given them an option they hadn't had before, a possibility that might save lives. Finally, Kale raised his hand again. We will allow this, he said, but not alone. Dakota will go with you. 2 sets of eyes, 2 people to hunt and carry. And if there is danger, you both run. No heroics. It wasn't ideal, but Eliza knew better than to argue further. She nodded her acceptance, and beside her, Dakota did the same, though his jaw was tight with tension. They left 3 days later, before dawn, carrying as little as possible to move fast. Dakota led the way down the mountain, following paths only he could see, while Eliza fought to keep up. Her legs had grown stronger over the months of constant walking, but the descent was treacherous, the trail icy and steep. They didn't speak much that first day, both focused on covering ground while daylight lasted. When they finally stopped for the night, huddled under an overhang that provided some shelter from the wind, Dakota broke his silence. I am angry with you, he said without looking at her. I know. You risk your life, our life together. For what? Meat that might not even be there? For children who deserve to eat, Eliza said quietly. For Chosovi's baby and Kimimela's little brother and all the others who didn't choose this hardship but have to live it anyway. She touched his arm. I'm not trying to be a hero, Dakota. I'm just trying to help my family survive. He finally looked at her, his eyes reflecting the small fire he'd built. What if something happens to you? What if I lose you? Then you'll grieve and you'll go on, because that's what people do, Eliza said. But I don't plan on dying. I plan on hunting, gathering what we can, and getting back to camp before the next big storm. She leaned into him. I need you to trust that I can do this, that I'm strong enough. I know you are strong enough, Dakota said roughly. That is not the question. The question is whether I'm strong enough to let you risk yourself. That's not your choice to make, Eliza said gently. I'm not asking your permission. I'm asking for your partnership. Hunt with me. Help me. But don't try to protect me from my own decisions." He pulled her close, his arms tight around her. "You are a fierce woman. Stubborn. Brave. Sometimes I think too brave." "There's no such thing as too brave," Eliza said. "Only brave enough or not brave enough. And I'm finally brave enough to fight for what matters to me." They held each other as the fire burned low and the temperature dropped. Tomorrow they would reach lower elevations where game might be found, where the risks would increase, but so would the possibilities. For now, there was only the cold and the dark and the warmth of each other. The next 2 days brought success beyond what they dared hope. Dakota's skill as a hunter, combined with Eliza's sharp eyes, resulted in 2 deer and several rabbits. They worked together to field dress the kills, smoking the meat over carefully managed fires that produced minimal smoke. On the 4th day, while checking snares Dakota had set, Eliza heard voices. She froze, gesturing silently to Dakota, who immediately went still. The voices were speaking English, rough and loud with the confidence of men who didn't expect to be overheard. Soldiers. Dakota motioned for her to stay down, but Eliza shook her head. This was exactly the scenario she'd described to the council, a chance to gather information, to use her ability to pass through white society undetected. Before Dakota could stop her, she stood and walked toward the voices, smoothing her borrowed dress and deliberately disheveling her hair. She effected a stumble, a cry of surprise, and the voices stopped immediately. 3 soldiers appeared through the trees, rifles raised. They stared at her in shock. "Ma'am," one of them said, lowering his weapon, "what in blazes are you doing out here?" Eliza let tears fill her eyes, easy enough when she was genuinely terrified of what would happen if they found Dakota. "Thank heaven," she gasped. "I've been lost for days. The savages who took me, I managed to escape, but I've been wandering." "Apaches took you?" The soldier who spoke was older, a sergeant by his stripes. His face hardened. "When? Where's their camp?" "I don't know," Eliza said, making her voice shake. "They moved several times. I was so frightened, I just ran when I got the chance. Please, can you help me get to the nearest fort? I just want to go home." The soldiers exchanged glances. "We're on patrol," the sergeant said, "but we can take you back to Fort Marcy. It's a 2-day ride." He studied her. "You look half-starved. When did you eat last?" "Yesterday," Eliza lied. "I found some berries." The youngest soldier, barely more than a boy, pulled dried meat from his pack and offered it to her. Eliza took it with trembling hands, forcing herself to eat slowly when every instinct screamed at her to save it for the children back at camp. "Did the savages hurt you?" the sergeant asked, his tone gentling. "We need to know what we're dealing with." "They moved camp several times," Eliza said carefully. "Always running. I think they were afraid of being found." Not a lie, exactly. "I don't know what they wanted with me. I just knew I had to escape." The soldiers seemed satisfied with this. They gave her a blanket, shared more food, and set up camp for the night. Eliza sat with them, asking careful questions about troop movements, patrol routes, how long they'd be in the area. "We're pulling back in a week," the sergeant told her. "Winter's too harsh up here, and command doesn't think the Apaches are worth the resources. They've probably frozen to death by now anyway." He said it casually, like he was discussing vermin. Eliza kept her face neutral, nodding along while rage burned cold in her chest. These men saw the people she loved as problems to be eliminated, not families struggling to survive. That night, while the soldiers slept, Eliza slipped away. It was risky, but staying would mean going to the fort, and she couldn't do that. She moved as quietly as Dakota had taught her, covering her tracks as best she could. She found him waiting where they'd agreed, his face tight with controlled fury. "That was foolish," he said. "They could have—" "But they didn't," Eliza interrupted. "And I learned they're pulling back in a week. The mountains will be clear." She pulled the dried meat from her dress. "And I got this. For the children." Dakota stared at the meat, then at her. Then he pulled her into his arms and held her so tightly she could barely breathe. "Do not do that again," he said into her hair. "My heart cannot take it." "I won't," Eliza promised. "Not unless I have to." They made their way back to camp over the next 3 days, moving carefully with their precious cargo of meat. The journey was harder going uphill, especially carrying the additional weight, but triumph made it bearable. The camp's reaction when they arrived was everything Eliza had hoped for. Children crowded close, their eyes wide at the sight of fresh meat. The women began preparations immediately, organizing the distribution with fierce efficiency. Even Kale smiled, a rare sight that spoke to his relief. That night, as the camp ate better than they had in weeks, Makota drew Eliza aside. "You took great risk," she said. "Went among soldiers, pretended to be what you are not." "I am what they think I am," Eliza said. "I'm a white woman. I just chose to be something more than that, too." "You chose to be Apache," Makota corrected. "That choice, that risk, it saved children's lives. You have honored us." The old woman pressed something into Eliza's hand, a small carved figure, no bigger than her thumb. "This belonged to my daughter," she said. "Now it belongs to you, for your children, when you have them." Eliza's breath caught. She hadn't allowed herself to think about children, about the future beyond surviving the present. But now, holding this tiny carving, she let herself imagine it. A child with Dakota's eyes and her determination. A daughter who would grow up knowing she could choose her own path. A son who would be taught that strength came in many forms. "Thank you," she whispered. "I'll treasure it." That night, lying with Dakota in their shelter, Eliza told him about the carving. He held it up to the firelight, examining the delicate workmanship. "Makota speaks of the future," he said quietly. "She believes we have one. Don't you?" "I want to," Dakota admitted. "But wanting and believing are different things. This life, it is hard, uncertain. I do not know if bringing children into it is fair." Eliza took the carving back, tucking it carefully into the pouch at her belt. "My mother used to say that there's never a perfect time for anything. You just do your best with what you have and hope it's enough." She turned to face him. "I think if we had a child, they'd be lucky. They'd have a father who respects women's choices and a mother who knows how to survive anything. That's more than most children get." "You want children?" Dakota asked. "With me?" "Eventually, yes," Eliza said honestly. "Not now, not while we're barely surviving, but someday, when things are more stable, when we're not running from soldiers or starving in caves." She smiled. "Yes, I'd like that very much." Dakota kissed her, deep and thorough, and Eliza responded with equal fervor. The future they were discussing felt both impossibly distant and intimately close, a dream wrapped in reality. The weeks that followed brought gradual improvement. The soldiers pulled back as promised, leaving the mountains to the people who knew how to survive there. The weather remained brutal, but the successful hunt had bolstered everyone's spirits and given them the strength to endure. Eliza's status in the camp shifted after her return. Before, she'd been accepted but still somewhat apart. Now she was fully integrated. Her counsel sought on matters that had previously been discussed only among the women who'd been born Apache. She sat in their circles as an equal, her voice carrying weight. One evening, about a month after the hunt, Kimimela approached Eliza with unusual seriousness. "I need to ask something," the girl said, her normally bright face troubled. "Of course," Eliza said. "What is it?" "There is a man," Kimimela began, then stopped, struggling with the words. "He is good man, strong hunter, kind. He has asked my father for permission to court me." "That's wonderful," Eliza said, then noticed Kimimela's expression. "Isn't it?" "I do not know if I want to marry," Kimimela burst out. "Everyone says I should be happy, that he is good match. But I'm only 17. I want to see things, learn things. Marriage means children, means staying in one place, means—" She trailed off helplessly. Eliza understood immediately. "It means choosing one path and closing off others." "Yes," Kimimela said, relief flooding her face. "You understand." "I do," Eliza said. "And I'll tell you what no one told me when I was your age. You don't have to say yes just because everyone expects you to. Your life is yours, Kimimela. Not your father's, not this man's, not the tribe's. Yours." "But what if I am wrong?" Kimimela asked. "What if I say no and I miss my chance?" "Then you'll have other chances," Eliza said firmly. "And if you don't, you'll still have yourself and the life you chose. That's worth more than any marriage made because you were afraid to disappoint people." Kimimela nodded slowly. You said no once? Before Dakota? I was never given the chance to say no before Thomas, Eliza admitted. My father arranged it, and I was too young to understand I could refuse. But with Dakota, I was given a choice, and it made all the difference. Not just because I chose him, but because I knew I could choose differently if I wanted to. I will think about it, Kimimela said. Talk to the man. See if he understands that I am not ready yet. Maybe later, when I am older and have lived more. But not now. That sounds wise, Eliza said. She pulled the girl into a hug. Whatever you decide, I support you, always. When Kimimela left, Dakota emerged from the shadows where he'd been listening. You give her dangerous ideas, he said, but there was no censure in his tone. Ideas about choice and independence. Good, Eliza said. Those ideas kept me alive. They'll keep her alive, too. Change is hard for people, Dakota said thoughtfully, especially when it challenges old ways of doing things. But change also keeps people alive, Eliza countered. If you never tried new things, you'd still be doing everything exactly as your ancestors did. And some of those ways don't work in this new world the soldiers have created. Dakota pulled her close. You are wise beyond your years. You know that? I'm just a woman who learned the hard way that tradition isn't always protection, Eliza said. Sometimes it's just another cage. They stood together in the doorway of their shelter, watching the camp settle for the night. Eliza thought about Kimimela's question, about the courage it took to acknowledge uncertainty, to ask for more time before committing to a path. She thought about her own journey, from dutiful daughter to reluctant wife to widow to whatever she was now. Woman, partner, survivor. Someone who'd learned that the most important choice was the one to keep choosing yourself, even when everyone around you expected you to disappear. I'm proud of you, Dakota said quietly, for what you did with the soldiers, for how you helped Kimimela, for everything you have become since that day at the creek. I'm proud of me too, Eliza said honestly. For the first time in my life, I'm proud of who I am and the choices I've made. As you should be, Dakota said. He turned her to face him. You know what I see when I look at you? What? I see a woman who was given nothing but took everything, who was told she was weak but proved herself strong, who was taught she had no value but decided her own worth. His eyes held hers. I see warrior, not the kind who fights with weapons, but the kind who fights by living fully and refusing to be small. That is true strength. Eliza's eyes burned with tears. I see you too, she said. I see a man who could have taken but chose to give, who could have commanded but chose to ask, who values partnership over power and respect over control. That's the kind of strength that changes the world. They kissed as the last light faded from the sky, and Eliza felt the truth of what they'd built together settle deep in her bones. This wasn't just survival anymore. This wasn't just making the best of a bad situation. This was love. Real, chosen, earned love. The kind that could weather anything because it was built on respect and honesty and the radical decision to see each other truly. The kind of love worth fighting for. The kind of love worth living for. And as winter slowly released its grip on the mountains and the first hints of spring began to show in sheltered valleys, Eliza looked toward the future with hope instead of fear. There would be more challenges ahead. There always were. More soldiers, more hardship, more times when survival hung in the balance. But she would face them all as she'd faced everything else since that day at the creek. With courage, with choice, and with the certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. Spring came to the mountains like a promise kept. The snow melting in rivulets that sang down the rocks and fed new growth in the valleys below. The camp stirred with renewed energy, people emerging from the long winter with the relief of survivors who'd faced the worst and endured. Eliza stood at the cave entrance one morning, watching mist rise from the warming earth, and felt something shift inside her. A certainty that had been building for weeks, maybe months, finally crystallized into knowledge she couldn't ignore. She was pregnant. Her monthly bleeding hadn't come in 2 cycles now. Her breasts were tender, her stomach occasionally unsettled in the mornings. She'd seen enough pregnant women in the camp to recognize the signs, had helped enough of them through the early months to know what her body was telling her. A child. Dakota's child. Their child. The thought filled her with equal parts joy and terror. This wasn't the safe, settled life she'd once imagined having children in. This was the mountains, The constant threat of soldiers, the uncertainty of where they'd be from one season to the next. But it was also love, community, belonging. It was a life she'd chosen and continued choosing every single day. "You are pregnant," Makota said from behind her, making Eliza jump. The old woman's eyes were knowing, her weathered face creased with satisfaction. "I can see it in the way you stand, the way you touch your belly without thinking." Eliza's hand dropped from her stomach where it had been resting unconsciously. "I haven't told Dakota yet." "Why not?" "Because I'm afraid," Eliza admitted. "Afraid of what it means. Afraid I won't be good enough, strong enough. Afraid something will go wrong." Makota moved to stand beside her, both women looking out at the awakening world. Every woman is afraid when she carries her first child. That fear means you understand the responsibility, the weight of bringing new life into an uncertain world. She glanced at Eliza. But fear does not mean you are not ready. You have survived winter in high mountains. You have faced soldiers and lied to them to protect your people. You have earned respect of women who do not give it easily. If that is not strength enough for motherhood, then what is? "What if I can't protect them?" Eliza whispered. "What if soldiers come, or we starve, or—" "What if child grows strong and brave like their mother?" Makota interrupted. "What if they live full life, learn both Apache and white ways, become bridge between worlds?" She touched Eliza's shoulder. "You cannot protect anyone from everything. You can only love them fiercely and teach them to be strong. That is enough. It has to be enough." Eliza turned to embrace the old woman, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she managed, "for everything, for accepting me, teaching me, treating me like family." "You are family," Makota said firmly. "And this child will be family too. Apache blood or not, they will be one of us. That is what we do. We choose our people, and then we protect them with everything we have." That evening, as Eliza prepared their meal, she watched Dakota sharpen his knife by the fire and tried to find the words. He looked tired but content, the worst of winter's stress finally easing from his shoulders. She didn't want to add new worry, but he deserved to know. "Dakota," she said quietly, "I need to tell you something." He looked up immediately, reading something in her tone that made him set down the knife. "What is wrong?" "Nothing's wrong," Eliza said quickly. "At least I don't think so. It's just—" She took a breath. "I'm pregnant." The words hung in the air between them. Dakota's face went through several emotions so quickly she couldn't track them all. Shock, fear, wonder, joy. He stood slowly, crossed to her, and placed both hands on her belly with a reverence that made her breath catch. "You are certain?" His voice was rough with emotion. "As certain as I can be without more time passing. Makota confirmed it this morning. She saw the signs before I told her." Dakota pulled her close, so carefully she might have been made of glass. "A child," he whispered against her hair. "Our child." "Are you happy?" Eliza asked, needing to hear it. He pulled back to look at her, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "Happy does not cover it. Terrified, yes. Worried about keeping you both safe, absolutely. But happy?" He cupped her face. "I am beyond happy. I am honored, grateful, amazed that you trust me enough to bring new life into this uncertain world." "You're the reason I trust it," Eliza said. "You've shown me what partnership looks like, what respect looks like. Any child of ours will be lucky to have you as a father." They held each other as the fire crackled and the camp sounds continued around them, the ordinary music of life going on. And in that moment, despite all the uncertainty ahead, Eliza felt peace settle over her like a blessing. The news spread through the camp with the speed of wildfire, carried by Makota's announcement at the women's circle the next morning. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Women crowded around Eliza, touching her belly, offering advice and stories and predictions about whether she carried a boy or girl. Even the men, normally reserved about such things, offered Dakota congratulations and teasing predictions about sleepless nights ahead. Kimimela was particularly delighted, her eyes shining as she hugged Eliza tightly. "I will be auntie," she declared. "I will teach the baby everything I know." "That's a terrifying thought," Eliza teased, and the girl laughed. "You are brave to bring child into world," Naira said, her own baby balanced on her hip. "Especially now, with everything so uncertain. But children give us reason to fight, to hope, to build better future. She bounced her son gently. They remind us what we are protecting. As spring progressed toward summer, the camp began discussing whether to return to lower elevations or remain in the high country. The debate was complicated by Eliza's pregnancy. Traveling would be harder as she grew larger, but staying through another winter at this altitude might be dangerous for a newborn. The council met several times, weighing options. Finally, Keel made a decision that surprised everyone. "We split," he announced. "Those who wish to stay in mountains stay. Those who wish to go lower, go. We are not strong enough to be one people anymore. We must become two, each group doing what is best for their situation." The pronouncement was met with stunned silence. Splitting the band meant dividing families, resources, strength. But it also meant flexibility, adaptation to changing circumstances. "Where will you go?" Dakota asked the old chief quietly after the meeting. "Lower," Kale said. "These bones are too old for another winter like the last one. I will take those who feel the same, the elders, the very young, those who need easier living." He looked at Dakota meaningfully. "And you should come too. Your wife carries child. She needs gentler place for birthing." Dakota glanced at Eliza, a question in his eyes. This was her choice as much as his. "I think we should go lower," Eliza said. "Not because I can't handle the mountains. I've proven I can. But because I want our child to have the best possible start. That means warmth, food, stability." "Then we go lower," Dakota agreed. The division of the band happened over the next 2 weeks. It was emotional, tearful, but necessary. About half chose to remain in the high country, led by the younger warriors who felt safer in the remote mountains. The other half prepared to descend with Kale, seeking the valleys and forests that offered easier survival. Makoto was coming with them, her old bones creaking too much for another harsh winter. So were Kimimela and her family, Naira and her baby, Chosovi and hers. Most of the families with small children chose the lower country, prioritizing their children's survival over the relative safety of isolation. The descent took a week, moving slowly to accommodate the elderly and small children. Eliza's body was changing noticeably now, her belly beginning to swell with the life growing inside her. Dakota watched her constantly, ready to help at the slightest sign of difficulty until she finally had to tell him firmly to stop hovering. "I'm pregnant, not broken," she said with exasperation after he'd tried to carry her pack for the 3rd time that day. "I know," he said, "but you are carrying precious cargo. Let me help." "You can help by trusting me to know my own limits," Eliza replied, but she softened the words by squeezing his hand. "I promise I'll ask if I need help, but right now, I'm fine." They settled in a valley 2 days' walk from where the soldiers had been patrolling, close enough to a white settlement that trade was possible, but far enough that casual patrols wouldn't stumble upon them. It was a calculated risk, but Kale judged it worth taking. The new camp came together with practiced efficiency, shelters rising in a matter of days. But something was different here. There was less fear, more openness. Some of the younger people even spoke of potentially trading with the nearby settlement, of finding ways to coexist rather than constantly running. "Times are changing," Kale said one evening, his old eyes watching the camp take shape. "We cannot live as our ancestors did. The world has shifted too much. We must adapt or die." "What kind of adapting?" Dakota asked. "Learning white man's ways while keeping our own," Kale said. "Trading instead of raiding. Making agreements instead of making war. It goes against everything we were taught, but the alternative is extinction." He looked at Dakota seriously. "Your wife, she is example. She learned our ways without losing herself. We must do the same, learn their ways without losing ourselves." It was a radical proposition, one that would have been unthinkable a year ago. But the year had changed everyone, had changed what seemed possible, what seemed necessary. As Eliza's pregnancy progressed, she found herself at the center of tentative bridges being built between worlds. A white woman from the settlement came to trade, her eyes wide with curiosity and fear. She saw Eliza, visibly pregnant and clearly comfortable, and her fear shifted to fascination. "You're white," the woman said in shocked English. "What are you doing here?" "I live here," Eliza replied simply. "These are my people now." "But you could leave," the woman pressed. "You could come back to civilization." This is civilization, Eliza said, gesturing to the camp around them. Just a different kind than you're used to. We have laws, structure, community, care for our vulnerable. What else does civilization require? The woman had no answer to that, but she left thoughtful, and she came back the next week with more goods to trade, and the week after that. Other settlers began coming too, drawn by the novelty of peaceful trade with Apaches, by the presence of a white woman who'd chosen to stay. Not everyone was happy about this development. Some of the warriors grumbled about losing their isolation, about contamination from white influence. But Cale stood firm. This was survival, he insisted. This was adaptation. And it was working. By late summer, Eliza's belly was round and prominent, the baby's movements visible beneath her dress. She'd been adopted by all the camp's women as a communal responsibility, everyone watching over her, offering advice, sharing their own birthing stories. First babies take their time, Makota told her. Do not worry if the labor is long. Your body knows what to do. Eliza hoped that was true. She'd attended enough births now to know they could go smoothly or terribly, that even strong women sometimes didn't survive. But she pushed the fear down, focused instead on preparing everything she'd need. The labor began on a clear September morning, sharp pains that took her breath away, and sent Dakota running for Makota. The old woman came quickly, took one look at Eliza's face, and began issuing calm instructions. Breathe through it, she said. Walk when you can. Rest when you must. And remember, women have been doing this since the beginning of time. Your body knows the way. The hours that followed blurred together in a haze of pain and effort. Eliza walked until she couldn't walk anymore, squatted through contractions, let the women support her when her strength failed. Dakota stayed close, his face pale but determined, offering water when she could drink it, and quiet encouragement when words were all he could give. You're so strong, he murmured during a brief respite. Stronger than any warrior. I am in awe of you. Eliza wanted to laugh, but another contraction stole her breath. This one was different, though, deeper, more urgent. Her body was telling her something had changed. I need to push, she gasped. Makota checked quickly and nodded. Yes, baby is ready. On next pain, you push. What followed was the hardest work Eliza had ever done. Harder than trekking through winter mountains, harder than facing down soldiers, harder than anything she'd imagined. She pushed until she thought she'd break, until she heard herself making sounds she didn't know she could make, until Makota's voice cut through the haze. The head is here. One more push, daughter. One more, and you meet your child. Eliza gathered every scrap of strength left in her body and pushed with everything she had. There was pressure, stretching, burning, and then suddenly relief as the baby slid into Makota's waiting hands. A cry split the air, thin and wavering but undeniably alive. A girl, Makota announced, her weathered face split in a huge smile. A beautiful, perfect girl. Eliza barely heard her. She was reaching for the baby, desperate to hold her, to see her, to confirm she was real. Makota placed the tiny, squirming bundle on Eliza's chest, and time stopped. She was perfect. Tiny and red and screaming her displeasure at being born, but absolutely perfect. Dark hair plastered to her small head, eyes squeezed shut, fists waving in indignation. Hello, Eliza whispered, tears streaming down her face. Hello, little one. I'm your mama. The baby quieted at the sound of her voice, her tiny face turning toward the familiar sound she'd been hearing from inside the womb. Eliza looked up to find Dakota staring at them both with such wonder on his face that she started crying harder. Do you want to hold her? She asked. He nodded, speechless, and Makota helped transfer the baby to his arms. Dakota cradled his daughter with exquisite care, his large hands gentle around her small body. He said something in Apache, soft and reverent, and the baby's eyes opened briefly, dark and unfocused, but seeming to look right at him. What did you say? Eliza asked. I told her welcome, Dakota said, his voice thick with emotion. I told her she is loved beyond measure. I told her she is bridge between worlds, proof that love is stronger than hate, that choice is more powerful than circumstance. He looked at Eliza. I told her she has the bravest mother I have ever known. The days that followed were a blur of exhaustion and joy. The baby, they named her Ayasha, meaning little one in Apache, with the middle name Rose after Eliza's grandmother, was healthy and strong-lunged, making her needs known at all hours. Eliza learned to nurse, to soothe, to function on fragments of sleep. The camp embraced Ayasha as their own. Women brought gifts, soft blankets, carved toys, protective charms. Even the warriors stopped to admire her, their rough faces softening at the sight of new life. She belonged to all of them, this child of two worlds, and they would all protect her. Kimimela was particularly devoted, appearing at the shelter multiple times a day to help with whatever was needed.
"She is beautiful," the girl said, gazing at the sleeping baby with adoration. "Perfect." "She's loud," Eliza said wryly, but her smile betrayed her absolute besottenment. "All babies are loud," Kimimela said wisely. "That is how they survive, by making sure everyone knows what they need." As autumn painted the valley in shades of gold and red, a delegation arrived from the white settlement.
They'd heard about the birth, about the white woman who'd chosen to stay with the Apaches and had now borne a child there. They came with curiosity, some with judgment, but also with a surprising offer. "We'd like to establish formal trade," their leader said, a rancher named Morrison who'd been among the first to trade peacefully. "Regular exchanges, we have goods you need, you have skills and products we could use, and we'd like to propose something else." "What?" Cale asked warily.
"A school," Morrison said, "a place where Apache children and white children could learn together. Reading, writing, arithmetic, and also your language, your customs. A place where both worlds meet and learn from each other." The proposal was met with immediate resistance from some quarters. "Why would we send our children to white man's school?" one warrior demanded. "So they can forget who they are." "Not forget," Morrison said carefully. "Grow. Learn to navigate both worlds so they can protect their people better. So they're not helpless against treaties they can't read or laws they don't understand." The debate raged for days. Eliza stayed quiet through most of it, nursing Ayasha and listening. But finally, Cale asked her directly what she thought. "I think the world is changing whether we want it to or not," she said carefully. "And children who can speak both languages, understand both cultures, will have power to shape that change instead of just surviving it." She looked down at Ayasha. "I want my daughter to know her Apache heritage fully, but I also want her to be able to protect herself and her people in a world increasingly dominated by white laws and white power. Knowledge doesn't erase identity, it strengthens it." Her words seemed to resonate. After more discussion, Cale made a cautious agreement. They would try the school, send a few children to start, and see how it went. But at the first sign of disrespect for Apache culture or attempts to erase their identity, they would withdraw. The school opened that winter, a small building on neutral ground between the settlement and the Apache camp. Kimimela was among the first students, her quick mind hungry for new knowledge. Other children followed, creating a small community of learners from both cultures. It wasn't perfect. There were misunderstandings, conflicts, moments when old prejudices surfaced. But there were also breakthroughs. White children learning Apache words, Apache children teaching their white classmates traditional games, both groups discovering they had more in common than they'd thought. By the time Ayasha was 6 months old, laughing and reaching for everything within her grasp, the valley had transformed into something unprecedented. Not full integration, there was still separation, still wariness on both sides. But there was also dialogue, trade, tentative respect. "You started this," Dakota said one evening, watching Ayasha try to grab his nose. "You chose to stay, and that choice changed everything." "I didn't do it alone," Eliza protested. "Kayleigh made the decision to move here. Morrison offered the school. The women accepted me." "But you were the catalyst," Dakota insisted. "You showed that bridges between worlds were possible. That choice was more powerful than circumstance. That love could cross any divide." He kissed her gently. "You are a remarkable woman, Eliza. Every day I am grateful you chose me, chose us, chose this life." "It's the best choice I ever made," Eliza said honestly. She looked around their shelter, at the baby sleeping peacefully in her cradleboard, at the life they'd built together, at the community that had become her family. "I wouldn't change a single thing." As winter settled over the valley, Eliza often found herself thinking about the woman she'd been a year and a half ago. The starving widow stumbling through the wilderness, certain she was about to die. That woman had been so lost, so convinced her life was over. She'd had no idea it was actually just beginning.
One snowy evening, while Ayasha slept and Dakota worked on carving a new cradle board for a family expecting their own child, Eliza pulled out a piece of paper Morrison had given her and a pencil. She wasn't sure what prompted it, but she felt compelled to write down her story. Not all of it, but the heart of it. She wrote about the creek where she'd nearly died and the choice that had saved her. About learning a new language and a new way of being. About finding strength she hadn't known she possessed and love she hadn't known she deserved. About the community that had claimed her and the child who'd made it all feel complete. When she finished, she read it aloud to Dakota. He listened in silence, his hands still on the wood he was carving. "That is beautiful," he said when she finished. "But you left out the most important part." "What part?" "The part where you saved yourself," Dakota said. "I gave you choice, yes, but you made the choice. You chose to fight, to adapt, to become part of something new instead of clinging to what was gone. That courage, that is what changed everything." Eliza set down the paper and moved to sit beside him. "We saved each other," she said. "You gave me the chance to choose. I chose to stay. Together we built something neither of us could have created alone." "Partnership," Dakota said. "Partnership," Eliza agreed. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the valley in white silence. But inside their shelter, there was warmth and light and the sound of their daughter's soft breathing. There was the life they'd chosen and continued choosing every single day. A year later, standing outside the shelter on a spring morning with Ayasha toddling between them, holding both their hands, Eliza watched the valley come to life. The school was thriving, with twice as many students as it had started with. Trade between the settlement and the camp had expanded to include not just goods, but shared meals, celebrations, genuine friendships forming across cultural lines. It wasn't perfect. There were still those on both sides who resisted integration, who clung to old hatreds and old ways. But they were becoming the minority. A new generation was growing up seeing each other as neighbors, not enemies. Kimimela had become a teacher at the school, using her gift for languages to help bridge the communication gap. Naira had started a business making and selling traditional Apache crafts to settlers who appreciated the artistry. Chosavi's son and a white rancher's daughter had become best friends, playing together without seeing the differences that divided their parents' generation. Change was happening. Slow, imperfect, but real. "What are you thinking?" Dakota asked, watching Eliza's face. "I'm thinking about how far we've come," she said. "How different everything is from what I expected. Better or worse?" "Better," Eliza said without hesitation. "So much better than I ever imagined possible." Ayasha babbled something that might have been words in either language or both, and they both laughed. She was growing up speaking Apache and English interchangeably, belonging fully to both worlds because she'd been born into the bridge between them. "Do you ever regret it?" Dakota asked quietly. "Choosing this life? Giving up the white world completely?" Eliza thought about it seriously, giving the question the consideration it deserved. "I didn't give up the white world," she said finally. "I just expanded my world to include more. And no, I don't regret it. Not for a single moment." She turned to face him fully. This man who'd given her a choice when he could have given her orders, who'd respected her when he could have controlled her, who'd loved her into becoming the fullest version of herself. "You gave me freedom," she said. "Real freedom. Not just the absence of restraint, but the presence of choice. The ability to shape my own life, make my own decisions, become whoever I wanted to be." She touched his face gently. "That gift changed everything. It changed me." "You changed yourself," Dakota corrected. "I only gave you the opportunity. You did the rest." "Then we'll call it a collaboration," Eliza said, smiling, "like everything else we've built together." They stood there in the morning sun, their daughter playing at their feet, the camp bustling with life around them. Two people from different worlds who'd found a way to create something new together. A partnership built on respect, choice, and love that had transformed not just their own lives, but the community around them. Eliza thought about the woman she'd been, afraid, controlled, living a half-life dictated by others' expectations. That woman was gone, transformed through hardship and choice into someone stronger, braver, more fully alive. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, loss and pain and fear, giving way to discovery and growth, and a love deeper than anything she'd imagined possible. She thought about the future stretching ahead, full of uncertainty but also possibility. Ayesha would grow up in a world that was changing, hopefully for the better. She would have choices Eliza had never been given, opportunities to be whatever she wanted to be. And she would have parents who would support those choices, who would teach her that strength came in many forms and love was worth fighting for. "Thank you," Eliza said to Takota, the words encompassing everything, the choice he'd given her, the life they'd built, the love they shared. "Thank you," he replied, "for choosing me, for choosing us, for being brave enough to see past fear to possibility." Ayesha tugged on both their hands, demanding attention with a toddler's certainty that she was the center of the universe. They both laughed and bent to scoop her up, holding her between them, a perfect representation of the bridge they'd built. And as the sun climbed higher and the valley warmed with the promise of spring, Eliza felt something she'd spent most of her life searching for and had finally found in the most unexpected place. She felt home. Not the home of her childhood, defined by walls and possessions and the narrow expectations of who she should be, but a home built from choice and community and the radical decision to love fully and live authentically. A home she'd found by losing everything and gaining what truly mattered. A home she'd created by choosing it every single day with the man who'd shown her that choice was the greatest freedom of all. The mountains rose eternal around them. The valley spread green and welcoming below. And in this space between worlds, Eliza Ward had found not just survival, but a life worth living, a love worth keeping, a future worth building. And that was more than enough. It was everything.